Hello. I want you to stop for a second and be honest with me. Have you ever felt an emptiness, a hole in your chest, even when your life seemed complete on the outside? That cold feeling that if you stopped moving, everything would crumble. It's a silent pain that touches your oldest wound, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of, deep down, not existing. We were taught that the fear of death is only about the biological end, but Rollo May, the giant of existential psychology, showed us the hidden truth. Our greatest fear is not dying, but rather reaching the end of life and realizing that we never truly lived. That we spent our existence running away, hiding behind relationships, titles, or possessions, to avoid facing the emptiness we carry. I know, it's heavy. It hurts to talk about it because it touches on your story, my story, the story of those you love. But what if I told you that this fear is actually the most powerful key you can have? The key to unlocking your life now. That your anxiety can be the map to your freedom. Get ready, because today we're going to unveil the hidden meaning of the fear of death, the key to living now. Are you ready to turn the page? And now for Helena's story, which will teach us exactly how to make that turnaround. But first, just check if you're already subscribed to the channel, because the next videos will be a series of content that will help you achieve unwavering health, not just physical, but existential. Just click the button below. From a very young age, little Helena understood the unspoken rules of her home. They weren't rules about schedules or homework, they were rules about how to be loved. Love, in Helena's house, wasn't unconditional, it was a subtly given reward when she was the calm, obedient child who didn't cause trouble. She observed her parents' gaze and, instinctively, calibrated her behavior to fit their expectations. It was a delicate dance, the less she behaved, the safer she felt. This dynamic created a deep fissure in her psyche. Every time she swallowed a bold opinion, every time she kept genuine anger or sadness to herself to maintain peace and a parental smile, she was sending a cruel message to her own being: your authenticity is dangerous. Your acceptance is more valuable than your truth. The security of being seen and accepted, even if it was just a filtered version of herself, became her existential drug. Helena quickly became a master of the art of conformity. At school, she was the exemplary student who never questioned anything. In her social circle, the loyal friend who always agreed. This relentless pursuit of approval was, in fact, her first and most desperate attempt to avoid abandonment. If everyone liked her, no one would leave her. It was a logical equation in a child's mind, but destructive in adult life. The cost of this conformity, however, was high: the gradual loss of her inner voice. Her own desires and passions were locked away, suffocated beneath layers of what is expected. She lived in perpetual self-denial, wearing the mask of perfection, in the hope that, beneath it, the real Helena, with all her flaws and needs, would never be discovered and therefore never rejected. The tragedy here is that, by conforming, she was already experiencing a form of death. Rollo May would tell us that neurosis is precisely this loss of the capacity to be oneself. Helena was alive, but her capacity to be authentic was in a coma induced by the need for security. She was paving a future of dependence, unaware that the search for external security was leading her to the greatest risk: losing herself completely. This childhood fear solidified like a computer program running in the background: you only exist if you are confirmed by the gaze of another. And this program would be the engine of her future choices, setting the stage for the great collapse that was to come. She was buying today's peace with tomorrow's freedom, a trade that, for existential psychology, is at the heart of anxiety and unhappiness. The most dangerous abandonment Helena suffered did not come from the outside, but from within. She became her own tormentor, a harsh judge who silenced her true desires before they had a chance to breathe. This was subtle abandonment, an erosive process of self-denial where Helena's genuine tastes and passions were seen as obstacles or inconveniences on the path to social and familial acceptance. Remember painting, for example. As a child, Helena felt immense joy in mixing colors, in creating vibrant worlds on the canvas. But when a relative commented that art doesn't offer a future, and that she should focus on something more solid, she put away her brushes with an almost feverish urgency. The decoded message was clear: her inner joy is less important than her social usefulness. From then on, she began collecting accessories of identity. She adopted the musical style of her popular friend, read the books that were trending, and smiled in conversations about topics that, deep down, bored her profoundly. It was as if she were assembling a straw doll, dressing it in clothes that would please the audience, hoping that no one would notice that there wasn't a real heart beating there. The tragic paradox is that the further she distanced herself from her essence, the more invisible she felt. People, after all, were connecting with the mask, not with her. And this disconnection created an even greater void, fueling the desperate need to seek more and more external approval. She was in a vicious cycle of abandoning herself to avoid being abandoned by others. This inner emotional abandonment is what Rollo May defines as the loss of the courage to be. To exist fully, we need the courage to be who we are, even if it causes conflict or isolation. Helena, however, chose the path of existential cowardice, preferring the false security of the crowd to the terrifying solitude of authenticity. She traded her inner life for a facade. It's crucial to understand that when the real Helena was ignored, she didn't feel anger towards others, she felt shame for herself. The guilt of having inappropriate, or improper, desires led her to bury those desires even deeper, ensuring the cycle of self-abandonment continued. This internal denial perfectly prepared her for the extreme dependence that would characterize her first major relationship. She was becoming an echo. An echo that repeated the phrases of others, that reflected the tastes of others, but that did not emit its own sound. And this absence of its own sound, this lack of resonance, is the most intimate manifestation of the fear of death, because if you don't have an essence, what exactly will remain when the world leaves you? Helena's story is proof that our greatest betrayal is the betrayal of ourselves. The encounter with Raphael wasn't a romance, it was an existential rescue. In Helena's eyes, he wasn't just an attractive man or a potential partner, he was her last chance to fill the void left by her self-neglect. Raphael represented the anchor, the fixed point in the chaos of uncertainty she felt about who she really was. When Raphael expressed admiration for her, even if it was for the agreeable and conformist version she presented, Helena felt an overwhelming relief. It was as if he were signing a certificate of existence. Yes, Helena, you exist, and you are valuable, because I, Raphael, see you. She clung to this validation with an intensity bordering on obsession, but which she disguised under the name of romantic love. The dynamics of the relationship were, from the beginning, a total projection. Helena wasn't seeking mutual exchange, she was seeking completeness. She poured all her needs for meaning, security, and identity onto Raphael. He became her passport to the world, the justification for her choices, and the gravitational center of her life. She could no longer differentiate where Helena's I ended and where the we with Raphael began. This is what May would call pathological love, neurotic dependence, where the person does not love the other for who they are, but for what they represent for their own psychic survival. Helena did not see Raphael, she saw the reflection of herself that he provided, a reflection that prevented her from facing the darkness of her inner solitude. The danger was that, by making Raphael her sole purpose, she was inevitably turning him into a god. And gods are terrible romantic partners. He carried the unbearable burden of being another person's only source of joy, purpose, and worth. It was a pressure that, sooner or later, would explode. Helena dedicated herself to being the perfect partner for him, organized, supportive of his dreams, further diminishing her own. She was investing all her chips in the illusion that, if she were indispensable to Raphael, he would be obliged to stay. It was an existential transaction: I give you my life, and you give me the guarantee that I won't disappear. True love is free. Helena's relationship was a prison disguised as a safe haven. And so, while the relationship flourished in the eyes of the world, the real Helena withered silently. She was building her house on a foundation that wasn't hers, preparing for the inevitable storm that would sweep away the only thing she believed she had, her existence attested to by another. Helena's investment in Raphael wasn't gradual, it was a total and blind immersion. She didn't just love him, she chose him as the sole source of her identity. Imagine an artist who destroys all her canvases and starts painting only the works of another. That's what Helena did to herself. She dismantled her own internal structures, transferring all her energy, dreams, and ambitions into Raphael's orbit. If he had a new work project, she dedicated hours to researching and organizing it. If he had a hobby, she made it her own. If he had a political opinion, hers immediately aligned with it. It wasn't sacrifice for love, it was a survival tactic. She believed that by becoming an indispensable extension of him, she would become inseparable. The fusion was her armor against abandonment. This level of blind investment, however, made her extremely vulnerable. Rollo May argues that a healthy person is one who can endure separation and loneliness, who can be an autonomous individual. Helena, on the contrary, was actively sabotaging her autonomy. She no longer had her own emotional bank account, all her value was deposited in Raphael's account. She stopped cultivating her old friendships that questioned the relationship or reminded her of who she was before it. Her family, who tried to offer subtle warnings, were seen as a threat to her newfound happiness and were kept at a distance. She was progressively isolating herself, cutting off all escape routes, convinced that the path to happiness was total and unrestricted surrender. The result of this investment was the loss of her ability to make her own decisions. When asked about her future plans, Helena always responded with, "we." If she thought about changing careers, the first and only filter was, does this fit into Raphael's life? Her internal compass was broken, replaced by her partner's GPS. The worst part was that, in this blind trust, she was neglecting the small signs that something was wrong. His prolonged absences, his distant gazes, his broken promises, everything was rationalized and ignored. After all, acknowledging any flaw in Raphael meant acknowledging the fragility of her own existence. And that, for Helena, was a greater fear than death itself. This period of total surrender is the climax of her escape from herself. She reached the point where there was no longer a Helena for Raphael to abandon, only a satellite in her orbit. And, unfortunately, satellites, when the gravity of the central planet gives way, are launched into the cold, dark space, without direction and without their own heat. She was about to discover the pain of the absence of her own light. The morning Raphael left was, for Helena, the equivalent of an existential earthquake. There were no screams, no broken dishes, only the terrible and silent discovery of a note on the kitchen table. A few cold lines, a perfunctory apology, and the statement that he needed space. For him, it was a decision, for Helena, it was death. She didn't feel the pain of losing a love, she felt the terror of annihilation. The world she had carefully constructed, the identity she had borrowed, all crumbled in an instant. The shock wasn't from Raphael's departure, but from the sudden and brutal return to that void she had been avoiding since childhood. The anchor had been cut, and she was adrift, not knowing where to go. Her initial reaction wasn't tears, but petrified denial. She called him repeatedly, not begging him to come back, but pleading for an explanation that could rewire her existence. If he could give a logical reason, perhaps she could piece together who she was based on that reason. But the absence of a satisfactory answer amplified the terror, it made no sense, and she was confronted with the absurd. The house suddenly became a museum of ghosts. Every object, the empty side of the bed, his toothbrush, the book he was reading, screamed of absence. And this absence wasn't just his, it was the absence of the Helena she had become. The death of the relationship was, in reality, the death of a false identity. This is the crucial moment where Rollo May's thesis becomes visceral, the fear of death manifests as the loss of our world of meaning. Helena wasn't lamenting the future with Raphael, she was lamenting Helena's future. Her capacity to be someone had been kidnapped, and now the kidnapper had fled, leaving her with the responsibility of freeing herself. The abandonment was an act of psychic violence, but one that carried within it a terrible and necessary gift, freedom. Although she was terrified, she was finally free from the demands of the mask she wore. She was naked, unprotected, but for the first time in years, she was no longer imprisoned. The shock was the beginning of her existential crisis, the gateway to the abyss, but also the portal to rebirth. The shock soon gave way to anxiety. And here, we need to use Rollo May's lens. Helena's anxiety was not a simple worry, it was her being's reaction to the threat of her own collapse. She plunged into a loneliness that was not merely a lack of companionship, but a radical absence of meaning. If her life had been defined by us, what did I mean? The answer was an empty echo. The loss of identity pushed her into existential anxiety, the kind that attacks at night, that tightens the chest, that makes the world seem unreal. She felt she was nowhere. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, an empty shell. Loneliness was an overwhelming weight. Not because she had no one to talk to, but because she had nothing to say. The words had been his, the dreams had been his. Without an external reference point, she was a ship without a sail, without a rudder, simply adrift in a dark ocean. She began to doubt everything, her memories, her past choices, her own sanity. This phase is crucial for understanding the fear of death. What she feared was not so much the pain of separation, but rather the certainty that, without Raphael, she was only potential, not reality. She feared non-being, the possibility that her being was so fragile that it could be erased by the absence of a single person. It was the fear of becoming a forgotten footnote in someone else's story. Helena's mind functioned in a cycle of incessant rumination. Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? Why am I not worthy of being loved? But the mistake wasn't in something she did, it was in who she wasn't. The loss of her sense of self left her vulnerable, but, paradoxically, placed her exactly where she needed to be, at ground zero, where reconstruction was the only option. This solitude was her most brutal therapy. It was the litmus test for her ability to exist on her own. The plunge into the void was proof that her foundation was wrong, but also a chance to start over, this time building it on her own ground. She was being forced to look inward, and what she found was terrifying, but entirely her own. The plunge into anxiety led Helena to her dark night of the soul. It was no longer just sadness, it was the cold, naked confrontation with nothingness, the nihilism of which existentialists speak. She was awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, and realized that life itself did not guarantee her meaning. Meaning needed to be created. What she felt was the dread that, if the universe was indifferent, and if people could come and go, then nothing really mattered. This was the terror of existential death. It wasn't about the heart ceasing to beat, but about purpose ceasing to exist. She felt her life was arbitrary, without a divine script or a promise of guaranteed happiness. This confrontation with the absurd paralyzed her. She felt small, insignificant, at the mercy of greater forces. This is the essence of what Rollo May calls normal anxiety transformed into pathology. When a person refuses to accept the uncertainty and finitude of life, they become incapable of acting. Helena wanted a guarantee that the universe could not give, that she would be loved and that her life would have a predefined meaning. The absence of meaning was felt physically, a pressure in the chest, a sensation of drowning. She questioned the validity of every act. Why eat? Why get dressed? Why continue? If everything would return to dust, what was the point? This is the pain of non-being, the feeling that there is no firm ground beneath one's feet. But in the midst of this absolute darkness, Rollo May teaches us that the spark of creation resides. By confronting nothingness, we are forced to recognize our radical freedom. If nothing has a pre-existing meaning, then I am free to create my own meaning. This truth, however, is terrifying. It is easier to remain in the darkness of apathy than to bear the weight of creation. Helena remained there, at rock bottom, resisting this truth. She clung to the idea that one day Raphael would return, or that a new savior would appear, so she wouldn't have to face the responsibility of saving herself. But the dark night demanded a price. She needed to relinquish the hope of being rescued in order to begin rescuing herself. The dark night of the soul culminated in paralysis. Helena could no longer perform even the most basic tasks. Fear and pain combined into an oppressive force that pinned her to the sofa, to the bed, in a desperate inertia. The inability to act was the physical manifestation of her existential collapse. Her once immaculate home had become a reflection of her inner turmoil, piles of dishes, overdue bills, clothes scattered everywhere. She wasn't lazy, she was overwhelmed by the responsibility of every small choice. Getting up to wash a dish required an act of will that seemed greater than climbing a mountain, for that act meant choosing to continue, choosing to exist in a world that had rejected her. Fear reigned supreme. She was afraid to leave the house and run into Raphael. I was afraid to meet friends and have to explain the situation. I was afraid to turn on the TV and see happy couples. Above all, I feared the stillness, for it was there that the emptiness screamed the loudest. To avoid the fear and the pain, she chose the anesthesia of immobility. This paralysis is not a lack of motivation, it is the excessive anxiety of freedom. May would say that the neurotic person is afraid to be themselves and to make authentic decisions, because these decisions can lead to mistakes, conflicts, or worse, to further abandonment. The paralysis was their defense. If they didn't act, they couldn't make mistakes. However, this inaction was, in itself, a choice. A choice not to live. And that is the great trap of anxiety. In trying to avoid the suffering of life, we end up trapped in the suffering of stagnation. Helena became a hostage to herself, chained by the invisible chains of existential dread. She watched the world go by outside her window, but felt separated by a glass wall. Life continued outside, vibrant and chaotic, but she was in limbo, waiting, without knowing what for. Her routine was a cycle of disturbed sleep, poor nutrition, and hours of dense silence. This paralysis was the lowest point of her journey, but also the point where the pressure for change would become unbearable. The paralysis couldn't last forever. The internal pressure for life, even if stifled, was insistent. The first sign that Helena wasn't completely lost was the small, yet gigantic, act of calling a therapist. It wasn't an act of hope, but an act of conscious desperation. She realized she needed help to bear the weight of her newfound freedom. Therapy offered no easy answers or promises of Raphael's return. The therapist, acting as an existential guide, did not try to fill Helena's void, he helped her confront it. The office became her safe laboratory, where she could finally take off the mask and be the stranger she saw in the mirror. The journey of self-discovery began with the painful task of unearthing the real story. She needed to understand that Raphael's abandonment was merely the trigger for a much older wound, that of self-abandonment in childhood. She began to connect the dots, her need to be perfect, the complete transference of her identity, the primal fear of disappearing. The therapist subtly introduced her to the idea that her anxiety was a sign of life. May teaches that anxiety is our reaction to the danger of becoming. The fear was proof that she was a person with potential, with choices to make. Instead of running away from anxiety, she needed to learn to sit with it, to listen to it as a voice calling her to her own reality. Helena began practicing small acts of brutal honesty. Saying aloud that she felt anger, that she was envious, that she didn't know what she wanted, things she had repressed her whole life. Each confession was a brick removed from the wall of perfection she had built. It was painful, but each brick removed made her lighter, closer to her true center. This mentor was crucial because he didn't save her, he taught her how to save herself. He didn't give her a new meaning, he challenged her to create one. Helena's journey of self-discovery was just beginning, but the compass had been pointed in the right direction, inward. She was learning to be the witness of her own life, instead of just a supporting actress. One of the most difficult moments in therapy was when Helena finally acknowledged the uncomfortable truth. She wasn't just sad about losing Raphael, she was terrified of losing her excuse. She was running from her own freedom. In the existential view, freedom is synonymous with responsibility. If you are free, you are solely responsible for your choices, your failures, and your meaning. When she was with Raphael, she could blame the relationship, the circumstances, or even him, for the absence in her life. Now, without him, the responsibility was entirely hers. And this burden was the real cause of her paralysis. She realized that neurotic dependence, blind investment, was not merely a romantic mistake, it was an escape strategy. Escaping the daunting task of creating an autonomous self. Escaping the awareness that, ultimately, we are alone in our capacity to make decisions. She was fleeing the anguish of choice. This realization was painful because it implied that she had been complicit in her own unhappiness. She was not merely a victim of abandonment, she was the architect of her own prison of addiction. This self-deception, this deviation from the truth, is what May calls an inauthentic life. The therapist helped her see that anxiety wasn't a monster, but a sentinel warning her that she was on the cusp of a crucial decision. Anxiety was the cost of her newfound freedom. If she wanted to live authentically, she would have to embrace this anxiety as part of the process. Helena began to dismantle the victim narrative. She stopped saying, "Raphael left me," and started saying, "I chose to invest my life in Raphael." This small shift in language was a seismic transfer of power. She was taking back the pen of her story. Acknowledging the escape was the first step toward true empowerment. It's not easy to admit that we built our own prison, but only by admitting this can the cell door be opened. Helena was finally ready to switch from survival mode to creation mode. From the recognition of the escape came the discovery of willpower. For Rollo May, willpower is not merely willpower, it is the capacity to organize oneself towards a goal and to make decisions that integrate reason and emotion. In her state of paralysis, Helena's will was crushed. The first act of will wasn't dramatic, it was simple. It was the decision, after weeks, to take a shower and wash her hair. Not because someone was coming, not to impress Raphael, but because she chose to do it for herself, to honor her own body. This small act was a declaration of war against inertia. Next came the decision to call a friend she had been avoiding and tell her the truth, not the edited version, but the raw truth of her pain and fear. It was an act of courage, risking rejection in exchange for authenticity. She was rebuilding her capacity for action, one baby step at a time. She began practicing what May calls choices for herself. Choosing the music she truly wanted to hear, not the music Raphael liked. Choosing to prepare her favorite dinner, even if it was just for one person. Each choice was a brick in rebuilding her inner temple. These small acts of will were difficult because they generated anxiety. With each choice, the voice of fear whispered, "What if you choose wrong? What if this isn't good enough?" But Helena was learning to say, "I choose this, even if it's imperfect, because it's mine." She was learning to endure the anxiety of choice. The rediscovery of willpower was what got her out of bed. She didn't need a grand purpose to begin with, she only needed action. Action generated momentum, and momentum created an incipient sense of self-efficacy. She was proving to herself that, although the outside world might crumble, her capacity for choice remained intact. Helena was becoming the author of her own life again. What had once been an imposed obligation was now a conscious choice. She was transforming freedom as a burden into freedom as power. Helena finally understood the existential maxim, anguish is not the enemy, it is the compass. She stopped desperately fighting to get rid of the pain and anxiety, and began to accept them as inevitable consequences of living authentically. This acceptance transformed anguish into productive anguish. She realized that each pang of anxiety when making a new decision, like enrolling in a course or quitting a stagnant job, was actually proof that she was exercising her freedom. If there were no anxiety, it would mean she was returning to the comfort of dependence or conformity. Rollo May defines the courage to be as the ability to move forward despite anxiety, not in its absence. Helena stopped seeking absolute peace, which, for existentialism, is the peace of death. She sought the peace that resides in knowing she is doing the right thing for herself, even if it is frightening. She began to channel the energy of anxiety into action. When she felt fear tightening its grip, instead of freezing, she asked herself, what is this fear trying to protect me from doing? And why do I need to do this anyway? Fear became a motivator, a constant reminder that what she was doing mattered. This phase was marked by a reconnection with her most difficult emotions. She allowed herself to feel the deep sadness of the loss, but without drowning in it. She allowed herself to feel the anger of having abandoned herself, and used that anger as fuel for change. Emotions, previously seen as obstacles, became raw materials for her transformation. Productive anguish taught Helena to dance with uncertainty. She accepted that she had no control over what the future would bring or over the actions of others. But she did have control over her attitude in the face of that uncertainty. She embraced the idea that life is a constant risk, and that value lies in the courage to take risks. Driven by productive anxiety, Helena's creative awakening was inevitable. Creativity, in May's perspective, is not just about art, it's the process of shaping one's being in the world, of manifesting one's individuality. And the authentic Helena needed to express herself. She finally took out the paintbrushes she had kept since childhood. At first, the painting was chaotic, a reflection of her inner turmoil. She wasn't painting to sell or to impress, she was painting to purge. The dark colors and abstract forms were the visual manifestation of fear, anger, and grief. But as she continued, something changed. Art became her dialogue with non-being. By confronting the emptiness of the canvas, she was forced to create. And with each brushstroke, she felt her own existence solidifying. The act of creating was the act of affirming, I am. The creative awakening extended beyond the screen. She discovered a forgotten pleasure in redecorating her apartment, making it a reflection of her new personality, not her past tastes. She began to write, recording her deepest thoughts and feelings, giving form and structure to her inner chaos. The importance of creativity is that it is intrinsically authentic. You can't truly create if you're conforming. For Helena, this process was healing her self-neglect. She was finally honoring the part of herself that had been silenced for years. She was learning to love her own voice, even if it was shrill or imperfect. The act of creating was the most effective antidote to the fear of death. Because art is a form of immortality. By creating something that comes from her essence, Helena was leaving a mark on the world, proof that she had existed and lived fully. The construction of Helena's autonomy was a slow but unbreakable process. Autonomy, for May, is not isolation, but rather the capacity for self-governance. She was abandoning the position of a satellite to become her own sun. This involved regaining control of her finances, career planning, and everyday decisions. She no longer sought the opinion of others for every step, she sought advice, but the final decision was always hers. She was learning to trust her own voice and intuition, even when anxiety tried to sabotage her. She learned to say no without feeling guilty. To say no to invitations that didn't appeal to her, to requests that overwhelmed her, or to new romantic advances that seemed to promise a return to dependency. Each no was an act of self-affirmation, a setting of boundaries that were sacred to her newfound integrity. Her autonomy was also evident in how she dealt with loneliness. She transformed it from a terrifying void into a sacred space for creativity and self-discovery. She began to enjoy long walks alone, going to the movies, not as a substitute for company, but as an encounter with herself. Building her autonomy was the ultimate cure for the fear of death. Because, by becoming self-sufficient, the threat of being abandoned by others lost its devastating power. If her worth doesn't depend on who stays, then someone's departure cannot take it away. Helena was becoming the author, the protagonist, and the editor of her own story. She accepted full responsibility for her happiness and unhappiness. This is the point where the inauthentic life breaks down and the authentic life emerges. So, did you already know about the benefits of confronting non-being? Did you already know some of this information about how anxiety is actually a call to freedom? Leave a comment, I'd love to know your opinion. Continuing. It was in a moment of clarity, while looking at one of her paintings, that the hidden meaning of her fear fully revealed itself. The fear that had paralyzed her for years, the fear of being abandoned, was not the fear of being alone. It was the fear of not authentically existing if she were left behind. She realized that when she was with Raphael, she was a secondary version of herself. And this version, because it wasn't true, was inherently fragile and disposable. The real fear was that if Raphael left, the mask would fall, and underneath there would be nothing. The fear of being abandoned was the fear of the inner emptiness she herself had created by denying her essence. Raphael's abandonment, therefore, had not been the problem, it had been the warning sign, the necessary crisis that forced her to finally build her existence on her own ground. The fear of death was, in fact, the fear of having wasted her life living someone else's story. This revelation was liberating. She stopped seeing abandonment as a tragedy and reinterpreted it as the catalyst for her self-discovery. The suffering wasn't random, it was the raw material for her growth. She didn't need Raphael to exist, she needed herself to exist. The hidden meaning was the understanding that external insecurity reflected internal insecurity. The key to security was not in clinging to the other, but in anchoring oneself. The fear of being left only disappeared when she became the person she would never leave again. Helena finally embraced her essential solitude. She understood that we are all alone on our journey of meaning, but that this solitude is the source of our strength. She was ready to live with the courage of imperfection, knowing that her existence was valid in itself. With an understanding of the hidden meaning, death ceased to be a paralyzing terror and became a motivating ally. Helena embraced finitude. The new vision of death was not a lament for the end, but an urgent reminder for the present moment. If life is limited, if time is finite, then there is no time to live someone else's life, to postpone authenticity, or to seek the approval of others. Finitude became the engine of her passion, the driving force that propelled her to live each day with maximum presence. She wondered, if I died tomorrow, would I be at peace with what I did today? This question became her moral and existential filter. She stopped doing things out of obligation and started doing things out of purpose and joy. She chose experiences over possessions, meaning over status. This acceptance of death is the true key to living now. Authentic life, according to May, is only possible when one lives in the shadow of death, using this awareness to give weight and urgency to each moment. Helena understood that the anxiety she felt now was the anxiety of vibrant life, and no longer the anxiety of emptiness. Death, ironically, freed her. It freed her from the tyranny of infinite time, from the illusion that there would always be a tomorrow to correct her mistakes. The present became all she had, and she embraced it with an intensity she had never known. She was living with the integrity that had been lacking in her past life. Helena no longer feared the end, she feared superficiality. She no longer feared loss, she feared wasting her chance to be who she truly was. With her newfound independence, Helena was able to experience what true connection is. She reconnected with old friends, those she had neglected during her period of dependency, and formed new bonds, all based on authenticity. Before, her relationships were transactional, she gave herself to receive validation. Now, they were genuine encounters between two autonomous beings. She could be vulnerable without fear of manipulation, and she could be strong without fear of intimidation. She shared her life, not just her mask. Loneliness didn't disappear, but it transformed. She learned to appreciate solitude as the cradle of creativity, and companionship as a celebration of connection. She no longer needed friends to fill a void, she sought them out to share the fullness of her own life. Her new friends loved her for who Helena was, with her scars, her mistakes, and her newfound passion for art. They weren't her mirror, they were her companions on the journey, capable of challenging and supporting her with the respect that only exists between free individuals. Helena discovered that true intimacy lies in the ability to accept separation. In an authentic bond, you love the other knowing they are free to leave, but choose to stay. This mutual freedom was the foundation of their new and profound connection. She was finally experiencing the joy of giving and receiving in balance. There was no longer the dynamic of savior and saved, but the meeting of two souls that enriched each other. The fear of loss dissipated, for she knew that, even if someone were to leave, her anchor would always be within herself. Okay, let's move on to the rest of Helena's story, but first I noticed you haven't liked this video yet. That's really important so YouTube can continue showing you our content, and that way we can keep helping you. So, please like this video, it's free. Let's go. Helena's awakening could not remain isolated, it needed to be manifested in the world through purposeful work. She used her own story of death and rebirth to create a project she called The Inner Anchor, a support group for women going through crises of abandonment and identity. Her job wasn't to give cliché advice, but rather to witness the pain of others. She shared her experience not as a heroine, but as a guide who had been at rock bottom. She taught them not to run from the emptiness, but to sit with it and listen to what it had to say. Helena's purpose was not to fix anyone, but to facilitate each woman's encounter with herself. She challenged them to question their masks, to face their anxiety, and to take the small acts of will that would lead to autonomy. She helped them recognize the hidden meaning of their own fear. This work healed her daily, because she saw herself in each story, and the strength of others reinforced her own. She was transforming her pain into a resource, her vulnerability into power. She had channeled the energy of existential anxiety into a meaningful contribution to the world. Purposeful work is the ultimate expression of authenticity. You don't do it for money or out of obligation, you do it because it's a manifestation of who you are in the world. Helena no longer had a job, she had a calling. Her professional life became living proof that an existential crisis can be the most powerful turning point in a life. She was inspiring others to embrace their own freedom and build their own inner anchors. Years passed, and Helena achieved an inner peace she had never imagined. It wasn't the peace of apathy or the absence of problems, it was the peace that comes from total alignment between who you are and how you live. She still felt anxiety during times of great change, but now she welcomed it as an old acquaintance, a sign that she was on the right path. She had accepted the uncertainty of life and the finiteness of her existence. The fear of death no longer dominated her, it was a horizon that gave perspective to her journey. This inner peace was sustained by her continuous practice of authenticity. She allowed herself to make mistakes, and treated her failures not as proof of her inadequacy, but as data for the next choice. She lived without the neurotic need for control, trusting in her ability to navigate chaos. Her peace no longer depended on external circumstances. She might be alone, face financial or emotional challenges, but the center of her being remained firm. The anchor was fixed in her own autonomy and her self-defined meaning. Helena had transformed the solitude of terror into a source of power. She lived with gratitude for the past, not lamenting what she had lost, but recognizing the strength she had gained. Inner peace was the reward for having chosen courage over cowardice. She finally became the person who loved and accepted herself unconditionally. Raphael's abandonment, the shock, and the existential crisis had been the painful, but necessary, price for this freedom. Helena's story concludes in her old age, with her sitting on her porch, the late afternoon light illuminating her face and hands, stained with fresh paint. She is not alone, she is accompanied by her own history. Looking back, she feels no regret for the time spent, for she understands that each phase, even that of blind dependence, was necessary for her to arrive here. The abandonment, which was once the most traumatic event of her life, is now seen as the greatest gift. It was the crisis that forced her to find the key to living now. The key was the total acceptance of being, the courage to be who she was, knowing that this journey was finite. She had spent her life creating, loving authentically, and contributing. Her life was a courageous response to non-being. Her house is filled with her art and photos of friends and her children, who were born into healthy relationships built on mutual autonomy. Her life is a testament to the fact that we don't need guarantees to live, we only need courage. Death, now near, is received not with dread, but with serenity. Helena knows she did not live a perfect life, but she lived a true life. She will not be forgotten, for she left her mark on her art, on her work, and above all, on the hearts of the people she helped find their own inner anchor. Helena's story is not a fairy tale, it's a story of existential courage. She proves to us that the only way to overcome the fear of death is to live with such intensity and authenticity that, when the end comes, there will be no regrets. The key to living now is simply accepting that we are free and responsible for creating our own meaning. So, now that you know Helena's story, were you already aware of these events? Let us know in the comments if you knew them or if you know someone who doesn't. And don't forget to check out the upcoming videos appearing on your screen, as our Unwavering Health series will give you practical tools to build your own autonomy. Thank you for watching this far. Remember, your anxiety is a call to your freedom. Don't ignore it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving future content, and don't miss the next video where we'll talk about how guilt can be a guide to your vocation. Until the next video.